Welcome to Raising Daughters, the podcast that helps parents learn the best ways to support their daughters as they navigate the high levels of stress, anxiety, pressure, and uncertainty so pervasive in our culture today. Dr. Tim Jordan is a developmental and behavioral pediatrician who has specialized in counseling girls for over 30 years and sheds light on the realities of today's young women in all facets of their lives. This is your opportunity to learn how to better support your daughters, making them feel safe, secure, and truly loved in the midst of life's ups and downs. Here is your host, Dr. Tim.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to Raising Daughters. I already told you that, I guess, in the little bumper that goes on before these podcasts, but I do appreciate you stopping by. And today on this podcast, we're going to talk about why girls feel stuck. I see a lot of girls in my counseling practice as young as middle school, but especially in high school and or the women I work with and coach in college who feel stuck in their lives for a whole variety of reasons. And so I start out with maybe a handful that I thought of off the top of my head, and I wrote those down. And then I kept thinking of others and others and others, and then I end up with a long list. So I cut it down, and I don't want these podcasts to last more than 30, 35 minutes at the most. That's kind of the feedback I've been getting. So I'm going to cover as many as I can. Then if there's time at the end, I'll talk about what you can do to help support your daughters to get unstuck. I think probably I'm going to have a part 2 for this podcast, the how to help your daughters get unstuck. But first and foremost, let's talk about why your girls might feel stuck. And stuck means there's points in their lives where they feel kind of paralyzed. They need to make a decision. They need to make a choice. And they feel stuck because they too much fear comes up. Lots of reasons come up which causes them to not be able to decide, to make a decision, to move forward, to take an action. They may have to do something with letting go a toxic friend. That was a podcast I did in the last 6 months. You can go back and listen to that. Might be about making a choice about courses in school, about are they going to go to college or not? What college? What do they want to study? And maybe about a dating relationship. There's so many places in their life where they have to make a choice, where they're kind of at a crossroads, if you will, in their life, and they feel stuck there and they don't trust themselves to make a decision. Let's talk about some of those reasons why girls might feel stuck. Girls and young women. Oftentimes what I find is that they spend way too much time focusing on things they do not have control over instead of focusing on things that they do have control over. If you're focusing on things that are out of your control, then of course you're going to get frustrated because you can't always get what you want because there's so many other people telling you what to do. There's so many circumstances out of your control. And so then you're left to the devices of other people and you don't get what you want. They spend way too much time focusing on things that they don't have control over. And I see that frustration that mounts then oftentimes leads to more procrastination. And then they feel like they're immobile and they can't make a choice. So that's one big thing I see with girls and young women. They also start focusing sometimes on things that they don't have as opposed to what they do have. That includes their own personal inventory of their qualities that they can bring to a situation. They don't trust themselves because they're focusing way more on lack than on abundance. And when you focus on lack, what you don't have, that's discouraging. And at a time when you're at one of those forks in the road, you want to be more confident and encouraged and not discouraged and pessimistic and negative. But I think a lot of times what causes that negativity is that they're focusing too much on what they don't have as opposed to what they want. It also includes, I think, way too many times girls are spending way too much time living in the past or the future and not enough time in the present moment. If you're living in the past, a lot of times you're bringing with you some old baggage, some old negative beliefs. You're bringing into focus some old feelings, depression, discouragement. If you're living in the future, a lot of times that becomes anxiety because you're worried about what if. What if I make the wrong choice? What if I make a mistake? What if things don't go my way? What if, what if, what if? So if you're spending a lot of time in the future land of what ifs and getting all anxious, it's much harder to move forward. It's much harder to make a choice or decision because you're so afraid of goofing up, so afraid of making a mistake or making the wrong choice. Living in the past oftentimes does bring with it baggage that is discouraging for girls. They may feel sad about something in the past, are discouraged or unhappy, and that clouds their judgment. It clouds their emotions. And in that space, it's hard to make a good choice because you have all this other stuff pulling on you, emotions, old baggage, old negative limiting beliefs, which I'll talk about in a moment. So what they need is the present moment. And that's hard to do sometimes because they're not used to that. They're so used to, especially in this busy, distracting culture, they're so used to scrolling. What's next? What's next? What's next? I'm bored. What else can I do? Who else is out there? What if? What if? What if? They have a harder time being quiet and alone and in the present moment. That's where they need to be to make decisions and to know what's right for them. But we haven't done a very good job, I think, of training them how to do that. A lot of times girls feel stuck because they're letting their fears rule. Anxiety, their fears of uncertainty, fears of making a mistake, making that wrong choice again. I tell them a story. I think I talked about this story one time in a podcast a while back. And this is how lions hunt in Africa. I read this story somewhere. It's an old African proverb. So when the lions are hungry and they see like a herd of gazelle, the young female and male lions go downwind of the gazelle and they hide in the bushes. And upwind, they place the oldest male lion in the pride. He's old, he is weak, he can't run, he has no teeth, but what he can do, he can still roar with the best of them. So when all the lions are set up, this old lion sits up and he roars and he roars and he roars. The gazelle hear him, they startle, and then they smell him upwind, and then they run downwind right into the path of the young female and male lions, and they all get eaten up. So the moral of the story is when you hear the roar in your life and you feel your fear, the tendency is to run away from it, to avoid things. That's what causes oftentimes feeling stuck, running away from a problem, running away from something because you're so afraid of a bad outcome, or afraid of a mistake or whatever. So you get eaten up by your fears. That's so common with girls. I see that so often in my counseling practice. I teach them when they hear the roar, instead of running away from it. And by the way, when you run away from it and you avoid things, you end up making it harder to do in the future. Because in your mind, you create a bigger and bigger and a scarier and scarier story about why you shouldn't do an audition, why you shouldn't try out for a team, why you shouldn't take that AP class. You build the story up bigger and bigger when you avoid it, and then you get eaten up again by your fears, instead of hearing the roar, feeling your fear, and then going towards it and through it. Because, as the lion story tells us, your fears almost never have as much teeth as you thought. I tell girls all the time, think about all the times in your life when you've been afraid of something, got all worked up, and then you end up doing it, and then in the end you realize, well, that wasn't so bad after all. Actually, it was actually a good thing. So they can always rely on those old stories to give them the courage to say, it's okay, go for the roar. I did a podcast recently it's called How Unrevealed Commitments Prevent You from Getting What You Want. Go back and listen to that podcast. I don't want to spend much time on it here, but oftentimes the metaphor is if you're sitting like shooting a bow and arrow, aiming for a target across the field, you say, I want that target. I want that in my life. It might be a friendship, a relationship. It might be making the team. It might be about getting into the college that you want. And you keep aiming for that and you shoot the arrow, but it keeps falling short. And the reason it's falling short is that there's something unconscious below the surface that's pulling on you, that's keeping you stuck and keeping you from getting what you want. Unrevealed commitments. Go back and listen to that podcast. I talk about that in detail. That's a big one. It's so important that they develop an awareness of those unrevealed commitments. Some girls end up getting stuck because they're perfectionists. And they're working on an art project. They need to build up their portfolio to send to colleges because they're applying to art schools. And they don't do it because they start a piece of work and then they get frustrated because it's not what they want. And then they stop and they rip it up, throw it away. And that perfectionism keeps them stuck because they're so afraid of not doing it perfect. And most of the time, there is no perfect. So again, that they procrastinate and they stay stuck, and then they get really angry at themselves. They get down on themselves. Girls who are perfectionists oftentimes are really hard on themselves, and that's really discouraging. And that's one of the most common reasons I see that girls get stuck and they can't move anywhere because they're so afraid of not doing it right, or even worse, doing it perfect. And sometimes those girls, because they're so hard on themselves, it's not uncommon for them to develop what they call a fixed mindset as opposed to a growth mindset. You can Google that. There's all kinds of research on that. A fixed mindset happens when something starts getting harder. For instance, there were some research studies that were done with middle school boys and girls, and they looked at their math scores. And up until about sixth-ish grade, boys and girls math scores were pretty much the same up on the graph. And then in sixth grade, both boys and girls math scores started to go down a little bit because math got harder. And then for a year or two, the math scores stayed down. And then the boys' scores started going back up in high school and then got back to their level. Whereas the girls' math scores tended to stay down. They didn't recover. So in the old days, we said, oh, I guess girls aren't good at math. I guess boys are better at math than girls, which we know is not true today. But what they ended up finding was that in general, girls tend to have more of a fixed mindset about things, and especially when it came to things like math and science. I think part of that reason might be because they don't have the role models to look up to and say, wow, if she can do it, I can too. That's getting better. But for some reason, girls' brains are wired to have more of a fixed mindset. So what this research study did was they coached the girls in sixth grade, or actually in fifth grade before they started sixth grade, and they told them, by the way, math is going to get harder, and some of your grades might be a little bit lower. You may get frustrated, but what you do not want to do is tell yourself, oh gosh, it's getting harder. I can't do this, and therefore I'll never do it. It's like either you got it or you don't. You're either born with it or you're not. And when it gets hard, I may end up saying, oh, I guess I'm not good at it. And then you shut down and don't try as hard. So they coach the girls to be aware of that process and that thinking, and instead to say to themselves, it's getting harder because it's getting harder. And what I need to do is focus more, work a little harder, develop some new strategies. If I do that, I can grow in my math skills or my soccer skills or any skills for that matter. What they found was the girls that did not get the coaching, their math scores stayed low. The girls that did get the coaching, their math scores, like the boys, recovered because they developed a growth mindset. But a fixed mindset will keep some kids stuck. They get discouraged and they keep telling themselves over and over again, I can't do this because I'm just not good at it. And not only am I not good at it, but I'll never be good at it. I just don't have it. I think another thing that keeps girls stuck is they get too externally focused. We've taught them as a culture to look outside themselves for, am I okay? What do I need? They become way too dependent upon what they need from other people, as opposed to looking at themselves and saying, what can I do about this? To trust themselves, to trust their intuition, to trust their gut. They become way too dependent upon other people. I find that especially true today, more so than it was 20 and 30 or so years ago. We've been doing too much for kids, and they become too reliant on us doing things for them, rescuing them, problem solving for them, fixing their problems, rescuing them so they don't develop the muscles, if you will, to push through, to stick with stuff, to persevere. To have that kind of determination that says, keep at it, and then I did it. And therefore I can keep doing it if I get stuck again. So the stuck feeling comes from, I don't know how to do this by myself because I've needed my parents to do it for me. I coach a lot of college women who get stuck in that way. And they were so reliant on their parents that when things get hard in college and they're away from their support system, they kind of fall apart and they feel really stuck and they don't know what to do and they shut down. They get very emotional, they get frustrated, they get sad, they feel more anxiety, lots of anxiety in women in college. That's one of the reasons why. Other things that might keep girls feeling stuck or being stuck. Another is that they have, in many ways throughout their lives, given up their power. I did a podcast a while back about a dozen ways that girls give away their power. Go back and listen to that. The show notes will have the link to all these podcasts I've been mentioning. There's so many ways we've taught girls, condition them, I guess is a better way of saying it. They give up their power. The good girl conditioning, not too out there, not too much, giving up their power by letting other people's words bother them, giving up their power by doing things to please other people or to not disappoint other people. That's a huge one. A lot of the girls who I see and young women who are having a hard time with decisions, especially ones who have been reliant on their parents, who have done things their whole life to please their parents and to not disappoint their parents. Now they're 14, 16, 18, 22, and they're not happy in their situation, but they're so afraid of venturing off in a different direction because their parents may not approve, and that keeps them stuck. They're still too reliant on pleasing other people. It's not just their parents. We're a big part of it. It could be not wanting to displease or disappoint a teacher, a professor, a boss, their friends, whatever it might be. And that process, that life path of doing things to please others really will keep them stuck and unhappy. And in many cases, the ones I counsel, miserable because they're not doing what they want. They're not happy because they're not doing their thing. They're not leading their life. They're leading the life that others want them to lead. They get frustrated, they get unhappy, they get resentful, and then they oftentimes shut down and end up blaming other people instead of pointing the arrow at themselves, taking responsibility and saying, what can I do about this? This is my life. I've been blaming other people and getting me nowhere. So I need to start taking more responsibility and saying, what do I want? That's such a key shift for girls and young women to be able to go inside and say, what's right for me? What's my reasons for wanting to do this? I'll talk about that in the next podcast when I talk about ways to help girls get unstuck. And part of that way of also giving up their power is that they still believe some old limiting beliefs about themselves. They may have had experiences with friends, with their families, where they end up thinking that the reason this is happening to me, the reason my friends have ditched me and are excluding me, the reason my dad after the divorce isn't spending time with me or calling me, the reason is because I'm not lovable, I'm not important, I'm not good enough, there's something wrong with me, I don't fit the mold, I'm not attractive enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not good enough is a huge one. And if girls are carrying around those beliefs in their head and in their heart, it's going to affect every one of their behaviors. It's going to affect the way they show up. And if your belief system is, I'm not lovable or important, I'm not deserving, I'm not good enough, you're not going to show up with much confidence. And you're going to have a hard time making decisions because you don't trust yourself. Or you'll make a choice that's not good for you. Oh, I see that so often. A girl's picking really unhealthy dating partners, unhealthy friends, making decisions that are not really in alignment with who they are because they don't feel like that they deserve better. Oh, that's a hugely important limiting belief and process that can keep girls stuck. I also find that some girls may have a passion that they want to pursue. They want to become a writer because they've always loved writing. They love art. They want to do something in an art field. I've even had girls, a bunch of girls, several handfuls of girls in the last half dozen years who have always wanted to be a teacher. And those passions of theirs were discouraged by their families. And most often because, as you can probably guess, you can't make enough money. And oh, that turns my crank. So they have a passion. They love writing. They want to do something in an art kind of field. And their parents say you can't make money. So they give up on it. But then they don't know what else to do because that's what they want to do. And so that makes them feel angry, resentful, stuck because they're not doing what they love. They're not pursuing their passions and their interests. Oh, I've seen so many kids who get discouraged by that. And when they're young, even their parents, even in grade school, middle school, say, we're not going to pay we're not going to support you if you decide to go into theater or art or whatever. Even though lots of those skills transfer to lots of things. That's a whole other podcast in itself. So I'll do one of those someday. We've got to do a better job of not discouraging kids from their passions, especially when they're young. I did a podcast recently. It was called How to Help Young Adults Learn to Deal with Uncertainty About Their Future. Go back and listen to that podcast. The link will be in my show notes. But I think that uncertainty, a lot of times girls get paralyzed by that. Uncertainty paralyzes girls and young women a lot. They're so worried about making a mistake. And if they make one bad choice, one quote unquote mistake, they really believe it's going to derail their whole life. And that really paralyzes them from moving forward because they're so worried. This anxiety. And they don't understand. We haven't taught them that when you're in a transition time in your life, when you're going from middle school to high school to college to the next phase of your life, there's always going to be uncertainty. That's part of the package. You have so many choices. Not everybody, but a lot of kids who have choices and the freedom to make choices, along with that comes uncertainty. It's like when you if you go to college, there's going to be a lot of excitement about that, a new adventure. You can't wait. But along with that comes some fears because it's new. You're leaving behind your support system. You're leaving behind your friends. Am I going to be able to make new friends? So along with that excitement also comes some fears and some uncertainty. That's part of it, part of life. Part of life. There's going to be uncertainty that's involved with change and with transitions. We don't prepare our daughters well enough to deal with that. Listen to that podcast that I did about a month ago about how to help girls deal with their uncertainties. What else? A big one that we don't talk about enough. Systemic issues like systemic racism, stereotypes that can hold people back because they aren't given the same opportunities. They don't have the same number of resources. People look at them in a different way. They have a harder time being accepted into groups in certain situations. That's a whole podcast in itself to talk about systemic racism and the stereotypes that can hold girls back. So I'll do one of those in the future, but also read. We've got to understand that the system is not always geared to support certain kinds of people. And because of that, it makes it harder for them and they get discouraged and then can feel stuck. It's like they're banging their head against the wall and they're doing everything right, but they're still not given the opportunity. That's a huge one that we don't talk about enough. I read a story a while back about a man. His name is Robert Johnson. And Robert Johnson is the founder of Black Entertainment Television. BET. He was the ninth of about 10 kids. I think there was 10 kids in his family. I think that was what it was. And nobody had gone to college. He had decent grades, but he knew he wasn't going to be able to afford college. And so in his senior year of English class, his English teacher asked the class, "How many of you are going to college?" He was the only African-American kid in his class and the only one who didn't have his hand raised, and he was embarrassed. And so instead of being singled out, he raised his hand. About a month later, he said, the teacher told all the kids in the class, all those who raised their hands last month when I asked how many of you are going to college, how many of you had begun filling out applications for college? How many of you had met with a college counselor? Let me see a show of hands. Everybody raised their hands. All these white hands went up. He looked around and again, he reluctantly raised his hand again. And that motivated him. For the first time in his life, he started to consider another option for his life. He visited one of his friends who was a year older, Preston Pearson. And Preston was at the University of Illinois. He went there and he talked to Preston. He walked around the campus and he got inspired. And he started putting financing together for himself. He got some loans. He got a job cleaning the microbiology lab in his school and at college as well. And Robert Johnson said, going to college changed everything for me. I loved learning. I loved socializing, but it opened up my eyes to limitless opportunities available to someone who was willing to look for them. And he said, looking back, coming up with the $224 to finance college was my first multi-part deal. My most recent deal was selling the BET Holdings, the Black Entertainment Network, our television network, to Viacom for $3 billion. And Robert Johnson said it all started because a teacher asked one question and then he wouldn't let it go. All of our kids need mentors. They all need people behind them, supporting them, encouraging them. Some kids don't have as much of that in their families. So we need to provide that somehow. But that's a way that some kids can get stuck is they don't have the encouragement and the resources to do what they want to do. I also have talked in the past about sometimes kids get emotionally overloaded because life happens, things happen, They don't do a good job of handling their emotions, releasing them, channeling them appropriately in healthy ways. Emotions build up to the point of overload and overwhelm. And then, bam, it can leak out as anxiety, feeling blah, losing your motivation, feeling stuck, being distracted. That's one of the things that does keep some kids distracted is that emotional stuff that goes on that causes them to shut down, to feel blah and unmotivated, and they and procrastinate and not do what they know they need to be doing. I see that with burned out athletes a lot in my counseling practice. They've been doing these, I think, nutty 12 month of the year youth sports things on one team, hyper specialized, starting when they're 8, 9 years of age. By the time they're freshmen, sophomores in high school, a lot of them are burned out. They just have had too much of it, too much stress, too much pressure. And so they end up quitting and shutting down. And some of them need to either quit or to do more than one sport or take 2 or 3 months off. They need something, but a lot of times that's not afforded them. There's no off ramp for that for a lot of kids. They become way too focused on the destination and not the process. Too focused on the end result, i.e., a college scholarship, winning a national championship, being on the best club team. Not enough focus on the journey. It should be fun when you're playing sports, when you're in grade school, middle school, high school, college pros, but especially when you're a kid. It should be fun, but we take the fun out of it with all the pressure, all the stress from these super competitive, um, hyper specialized youth sports, if you will. So, I mean, girls need to learn how to handle their emotions, release them so things don't build up, because when they are on that emotional overload, it's hard for them to do anything. Too overloaded, too overwhelmed. I understand why they end up shutting down. Makes a lot of sense. And that means sometimes those girls have moderate to high levels of depression or anxiety. That could be part of the overload. If you have a lot of anxiety, obviously those fears can oftentimes hold girls back or young women. Or if they're depressed, that holds them back because they don't have the energy. They don't have the motivation. They just feel kind of bleh. And so they'll just mosey along and then they just can't seem to get things done. So that emotional stuff is a big one, especially the depression, anxiety. I've seen a lot of young people too in different stages of their life, especially high school, college, and in their early going in their young lives, who might have a job that at first was kind of exciting and they liked it, but then they end up feeling kind of stuck in that job. They get unhappy, they start blaming other people, they're unhappy with their boss, they start seeing things that they don't like in their boss, and they start seeing something in the environment that's toxic. They don't want to do that anymore. And oftentimes, in my experience, what they're experiencing is they've outgrown that job or that experience. They need to move on to something, a better situation that will better meet their needs at that point. They're not the same person at that moment that they were when they probably started that job. They've changed, their motivation has changed, what they want may have changed. That's part of growing in your job. So instead of feeling stuck and just blaming and being upset and frustrated and all that, what they need to do is start looking to move on and find something else that better meets their needs at that point. That's hard for some people to do because they don't like change, because change brings uncertainty. Change might bring some more fears, and at least you're going forward towards something that's a better fit for you at the time. So there's a lot of reasons why girls might feel stuck in their situation in life, why they may be having a hard time making a decision. Girls talk about feeling paralyzed. They know they need to make a decision. They know they need to take some actions, but they just can't get the energy stirred up to do it. And I think all those reasons that I have just now put out for you, I think those oftentimes will fit for girls and young women. So they might need to sit down and talk to someone like me and to figure out what's going on. What's your unrevealed commitment that's keeping you from getting what you want? Do you have some old unresolved limiting beliefs that might be holding you back? The emotional overload. They might need some counseling or a coach or a mentor to help them through that time. And they also need your understanding. I'm going to do a podcast soon. I haven't worked on it yet, but I will, talking about what can you do. I listed a whole bunch of ideas, so I think I'll make that a brand new podcast. There's a lot of things you can do to help your kids through those times and not do it for them. You can support them, you can advise, but they need to figure these things out for themselves. with your support. And what I'm finding a lot of times in this day and age is that I'm seeing more and more girls with that kind of stuck place earlier, younger, not just girls who are seniors in high school, applying to colleges and looking forward to the next big leg of their journey. I'm seeing the anxiety and the uncertainty and the blah feelings and the overwhelm with girls who are in middle school and even sometimes in later grade school. So we need to do a better job of supporting our girls, understanding what's going on for them, and even better, helping them understand what's going on for themselves. That awareness is key. They understand what's going on inside of me. Why am I having a hard time moving on? Why am I having a hard time taking steps? Why am I procrastinating even though I know I shouldn't? Why can't I make a decision? There are reasons why that they need to become aware of. All right, that's enough on this topic, I think, for today. I gave you a lot of food for thought. Look at my show notes. Go to my website at www.drtimjordan.com, drtimjordan.com. And I have I'm gonna list 4 or 5 previous podcasts where I've gone into detail about certain topics like dealing with uncertainty and reframing old negative limiting beliefs, things of that sort. So re-listen to those podcasts, and then that'll help you fill in the blanks for what I didn't do today. I will be back here as always in a week with a brand new podcast. I appreciate you passing these on to people, your friends. This might be one you listen to with your kids if they're feeling stuck, to give them some awareness and to stimulate some conversations with you so you can better know how to support them. I'll be back with a podcast soon about what to do about this topic, but also other topics as well. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you back here in a week.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Raising Daughters. Hopefully you've learned something useful about girls and young women and how to help them navigate the pressures, challenges, and opportunities of modern life. If you want to become a more effective parent, keep listening to the show at drtimjordan.com and let the conversations shape you. Build that one-of-a-kind connection with your daughters in the most profound and meaningful ways possible, shaping them into strong, confident women of the future. That's all for now. See you next week for another episode of Raising Daughters.